My name is Helen Zell. I'm 78 years old. Today is June 29th, 2021. um, my partner is Kuang-Hao Huang. Uh, I know this gentleman because he is my piano teacher.
My name is Kuang-Hao Huang. I am 50 years old. It is still June 29th, 2021. We are in Chicago, Illinois. I am interviewing Helen Zell, who is my piano student. But I'd like to think it's more than just piano student. I mean, we talk about things outside of just piano.
Indeed, we do.
So, because this is for Ear Taxi, I figured this is a fabulous opportunity for me to sort of ask some questions of you that maybe I haven't had the chance to. So, I guess for me, I've always wondered, because when I first came to you, we started lessons in 2014.
Right.
So it's about 7 years now. And when you came to me, you are on a very, very steady diet of Bach and Mozart and Schubert. And I noticed that, there wasn't any repertoire that was any newer than that. And, for me, as someone who plays a lot of contemporary music, and the fact that, I knew that you were very, very much into modern art, I thought it just kind of peculiar that you didn't play much. But then in the past few years, you've really grown into, exploring this kind of repertoire. So I guess I'm very curious how you see this journey, of expanding into, first Debussy and then, Messiaen, Scriabin, and even Philip Glass and the local composer Mark Mellitz. What do you think of all this?
Well, it's funny when you were recounting, what I was like when we first met. I can only think about what I was like when I first encountered the piano teacher who preceded you, who was also a very important colleague in your life, in addition to my teacher after many, many, many years of not playing with a teacher. I think that she was so focused on having me enjoy myself and be really comfortable playing the piano again and succeeding, not being challenged by things that were totally unfamiliar, letting me pick anything I wanted to play, that she felt that I would have a chance at maintaining this and sticking to it. And I think in some respects, she probably was right, because it took me a while before I kind of ventured out with you as well.
True.
A lot of it had to do with listening to a lot of things that you play, and quite honestly, I think that's how I grow. I don't tend to be as active in my choices, whether it's music or food or whatever it is. If somebody says this is really good, why don't you try it? I do. So I've become more adventuresome as a result of trying things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the reasons why I just seem totally unexposed, because I wasn't really into trying it. But that changed.
Yeah, well, that's that's exciting. No, because for me, it's very interesting, because I feel like if you are restricted to repertoire that's that old, you're actually playing music that was not written for the instrument that we play now. And I feel like, it isn't until in music written in the past 150 years that we really start to kind of get the sense that the composer is taking full advantage of the modern piano. Do you feel like you have more possibilities at the piano when you play modern repertoire?
That's a toughie. I mean, I still don't think I'm sophisticated enough to appreciate all the the capabilities of the modern piano. I mean, for me, it was a stunning experience to play a piano recently, a huge concert grand at a level that I only heard in concerts played by famous concert pianists, and I got a chance to play that piano.
Right.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, and I only was there for 2 days playing it, but all I wanted to do is go back and keep playing it because I'd never played a piano like that before. So this is a journey that maybe I'll begin now. I think I have a few good years left. Now that I've taken a bite of the apple,
Yeah.
maybe I need to understand that better. There was a time of like a couple of years ago when you had me play the harpsichord to see
Oh,
what it was
uh-huh.
like. That just blew me out of the water. I want to go back and do that more, maybe and
Right.
compare it. I never really appreciated that
Yeah.
at all.
I think maybe even just on a simply at the level of like the range, right? The range of the instrument in Mozart's day, right, is much more restricted. And all of a sudden, you are playing Messiaen or something like that, where you are using the very lowest notes on the piano and the very highest notes on the piano as well, like just to open up the possibilities in terms of sonority. Like, do you find that kind of fun just to be able to explore those sounds?
Yeah, I mean, and that goes back to that wonderful experience with the harpsichord. Notes don't get held. In harpsichords, they're plucked. So that's really disturbing to me. I mean, like I can imagine playing a whole piece without having a chord be held. Or I mean, I guess there's tricky ways that you
Yeah.
mentioned that you can do that, but I didn't know how to do that. And so the ease of doing it with the contemporary piano was it was easy. It just
Okay, I guess okay, let's move on to another question. I guess not concerned about, but just curious about. Um, is I guess first, a lot of people who are maybe big fans of classical music have a difficult time listening to classical, what we would consider classical or art music that's being created nowadays because of the language. They find it too dissonant or difficult to listen to. Like, was this a hurdle for you, or have you just always been kind of open to these kinds of sonorities?
it was a big hurdle, a huge hurdle. And there was some that was more comfortable than others, like
Yeah.
listening to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. I could connect to that, or Petrushka, but Stockhausen, or I mean, even some of Schoenberg. I just didn't understand it.
Mhm.
But really key in my evolution of being more accepting of that kind of music was taking a course when I was in college
Mm.
where I was forced to go to a listening lab and listen to these pieces that were complicated and dissonant and listen to them over and over and over and over until I actually could hum along. So what was originally dissonant wasn't so dissonant anymore. Now I'm sure there are pieces today that are still, even some of Boulez's music is really hard for me. But there's a lot of Schoenberg that I love. And certainly Scriabin I love.
Yes.
I don't think I'd ever heard of Scriabin, although I rediscovered him in my notes from my course. But listening really changes you. Listening to the sounds until they're familiar, and I go back to what it must have been like when people listened to Gregorian chant and listened to open fourths, and then all of a sudden you go from open fourths to thirds to triads.
Yes.
Well, that was a big move.
Right. Right.
So these people had to get used to that. So I should be able to get used to it as well. And today, it's after like postmodernism sort of gave way to what's going on now. Today, I find composers not so dissonant anymore. It's almost like they're
Yes.
pulling from all of the different music that was written, whether it was romantic or even classical or whatever it was. It doesn't sound like it did, in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean,
Right.
or when it even almost disappeared. When you had scores that had no notes. You just sat and you listened to total silence.
Right.
I have a John Cage score with nothing in it.
Yes.
There are no notes. So I think listening is a big deal. Listening a lot. I used to call it educating my ear, and it matters. So,
Do you find that there's a parallel to modern art?
oh, without a doubt. And this is something else that I sort of rediscovered when I was looking at my lecture notes from this course that I took in 1963. This instructor, a man named Glenn Watkins, world renowned, I discover
Right.
now, who just died, um, he talked about the relationship between uh, the music that was written in a certain time, the culture overall, what was happening in the world, current events, politics, all of these things. And he made connections in that way.
Mm.
So, if I look at the composers that were breaking everything up and just trying to go from the old traditions to something totally new, just destroying everything, throwing it all up for grabs. And I look at painters who belong to the abstract expressionist movement. All of a sudden, there's no figures there are no figures in the work anymore. It's all color and no recognizable forms. But it's just this great canvas exploding with stuff. You don't know what it is.
Right.
Can't recognize any of it. You may try to. Forget it. There are no recognizable forms.
Right.
It's gone. And then that eventually returns the artist to resurrecting the form again. The forms are all back again. People are painting portraits. So it's all constantly evolving, and it's all on a spectrum. And the music and the art are very much allied, with what's going on in one is going on in the other. So, and in politics as well. When the world is up for grabs.
Right.
World War II. That's when all this stuff started happening. It started going crazy. So it's all connected.
Yeah.
That's what's so fascinating about it. It's amazing.
Okay, so I just had a question. I was like, poof, it's gone. This is terrible.
Well, I could ask you one.
Sure.
You have really studied. I mean, your whole life has been the piano. Studying music. And when you started out, did you like all this strange stuff that you love to play now, where you take the piano apart and you put little felt strips in the piano and pluck the chords, or did you start out with Bach and Beethoven just like I did?
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of us, just going through a regular, your piano lesson trajectory as a kid, you don't really get subjected to those kinds of techniques. At least not not when I was growing up. I mean, these days, I think teachers are being much more adventurous and getting kids like inside the piano to pluck strings or to mute strings and all those things. But yeah, it was a pretty traditional kind of upbringing. Though, I did come across several contemporary pieces, and I think, the initial one, I think, like everyone, you kind of, it's very jarring. Like, when you're working on it, it's almost to the point where you can't believe that some of the notes are correct, right? Because they sound wrong. But then you kind of learn to like it. And I think then you start to like develop a taste for it. It's kind of like food, right? Like sometimes you have a first taste and you're like, that's
Brussels sprouts are not so bad.
And then, then your palate gets developed. And so I think by the time, I became an honest to goodness music major, I was more than ready to kind of expand my ears and to do things at the piano. And I think sort of different things at the piano. And I think I was also drawn to the option of being able to work closely with composers. I think when we're always working on pieces by dead people, you have all these lingering questions that you can only make really good educated guesses about what they may have thought or desired. And then all of a sudden you actually have this option where you can ask the composer, like, is this what you intended? Or is this what you like? Or sometimes you can surprise them. They'd be like, well, I didn't hear it this way, but I like it this way too. And the process is just more exciting because there is this collaborative nature to it. And then, I think also, I, you know, I'm sure all classical musicians feel the same kind, I don't say pressure, but there is, all the standard repertoire comes with so much baggage, because so many people have played this music before you, and so many incredible people have played this music before you. And you are sort of like confronted with this question of, well, what can I bring to this piece that somebody else hasn't already brought to it? Whereas if I'm the one that's bringing a piece to life for the very first time or for the second time, there is no traditional way of playing it. And so it's incredibly freeing, and, it kind of opens up your creativity, I feel like.
But see, that's something that I still am very uncomfortable playing with. I mean, you started to make me think about that. Like when I say, well, how's this supposed to sound? And you look at me and say, well, how would you like it to sound? And I said, well, I don't know, how would I like it to sound? Or how does this person play it? I'm going to listen to, 16 YouTube things to see if I can. And that same thing happened to me when I came back to the piano, let's see, I've been with you 7 years, 12, 13 years ago. The first experience that we had in the studio, in Debbie's studio, was picking a piece, finding a recording, and then playing it, like the recording.
Right.
So I was so proud of myself that I could play a Bach invention like Glenn Gould. I really got it down pat. That to me was an accomplishment.
Oh yeah.
To think of playing it like I wanted to play it. How do I even how do I even decide how I want to play it? But then I don't know. It's like when I talk to some of my musician friends who we share in common, one of them will say to me, "Well, stop being so cerebral about this. Just feel the music. Just let it feel it." And I go, "Oh, feel it." And you just gotta, be a little more liberated. You can't be so intellectual about it.
Right.
And that still happens to me once in a blue moon. But I know I have to learn to do it. I have to. That's you know, part of what I still need to do.
Yeah.
So. It's funny. I started playing the piano when I was 9 years old. And I, at that time, had a teacher who, I don't think she had many students. She was the organist at the local Methodist church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And at the time I started my lessons, she had just given birth to twins. She had one other child already, and the twins used to sit on her, both of them, and she'd be nursing them while I was having my piano lesson. And it would be like this, like love-in, she loved me, I loved her. I was never more comfortable than when I was playing with Lucy. I mean, Lucy Hudson she was the be-all and the end-all. And then eventually, after a couple of years, she had another set of twins. So she had 5 children within, 4 years. I don't know how, it was ridiculous. And so she said, I can't teach you anymore. As much as I love doing it, Helen, we have to find a teacher for you. And then she sent me to a real piano studio, with a teacher that was mean and demanding and had a ruler, and she used to whack you. Right. But she was also considered the best piano studio in Baton Rouge.
Okay.
The good news about her was that she always had like groups of kids playing together. We either had recitals or some sort of group performance, and she started a quartet that I played in. And that was my first experience playing with other people. And that was a whole new life. I love that. 2 pianos, 8 hands, unbelievable. And we used to give concerts and we practiced together. And so here I was with my friends interpreting music. She guided us, but she gave us a lot of leeway. But that was the first time that I kind of experienced what everybody's talking about today, like being in tune with somebody else, being able to figure out things about the music without somebody telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like I've forgotten all that. It only happened with those people. Translating it to myself was hard, I guess, because I wasn't taking lessons anymore.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually a real challenge for a lot of pianists, right? Like we are siloed, and I think that's why for me, the sort of the path that I've taken is mostly as a collaborator, right? But without other people to work with, I feel like it's very easy to feel stunted, right? Like you're kind of limited by your own thoughts and your own creativity, and it's much harder.
I'm short on that. I think you have more. Your reservoirs are a little richer than mine in the creativity department.
No, but when you've got other people to bounce ideas off of or to contribute their own
Right.
ideas, it just it's so much more interesting. I feel like
totally agree.
The product can be so much richer.
I think that's what's really, it's given me like a new energy. Not that I couldn't be sustained taking my lessons, working with you, but having all this outside stuff, playing with a cellist, thinking about playing with somebody who plays the bassoon, working on all these other aspects, or even thinking about people making music today, like some of these young groups. When I was young, I wasn't even aware that there were young people who made music together, like Third Coast Percussion, or all these strange groups of people, Spectral Quartet, all these young people. I just lived in a little vacuum. I thought the only music there was music that was played on the stage of large, halls. So that's an interesting question. But at one point in my life, I actually stopped taking lessons altogether, and that was really kind of
when was that?
When I was 15.
Okay.
I was relocated. My father's job moved him to New York, and I was so unhappy being there that when it was suggested that I look for another piano teacher, I said, I'm not playing the piano. I'm going to be lucky if I'm staying in the house, let alone doing anything. And I became very rebellious. I didn't want to do anything. Fortunately, I saved all my music, and I never threw anything away. And I never threw away my love of it either. When I went to college, I started doing a lot of listening to music, and I took up the guitar when I went to Michigan. So that was my first, like, having a teacher again.
Acoustic? Electric?
Classic guitar.
Okay.
Just playing Bach.
Okay.
I mean, unbelievable. I mean, and I loved it. And then I ended up in Chicago, and I started looking for teachers on and off over the years. And I would find one, and they would go away, and I'd find another one, and they would move. And it just didn't. I wasn't forceful enough, but I kept it in the back of my mind, for a long time. And then finally, 15 years ago, I started thinking about it again, because I was now an old person with different kind of time frame in my life. I didn't have any excuses anymore. And I had a really nice piano, and it was time. So I went back to it, and it's been even better than it ever could have been before. I'm sure I recreate the memories, but to have it now it's just a gift. It's a great gift.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I'm so impressed with you as a student. I mean, seriously, you take this more, sadly, you take this more seriously than some of my students. And they're music majors, which is a little just not great. But I think that it's amazing. Maybe it's just the fact that you kind of understand why it's important to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe they're just still too young, and they just they do it because it's what they've always done, but they don't really know why they're doing it or what that role is in their life.
I remember being where they are. There were a lot of things that I didn't take very seriously either. But when you're at the other end, of living, I mean, I'm not ready to hang it up yet, but your perspective changes dramatically. I mean, it's just, especially if you go through, married, having children, and working, all these things, your perspective constantly changes. And if there was ever a kernel of love for this instrument, or being able to play it or connect with it, it only becomes much more powerful. So I feel it today. I can still remember walking to my piano lesson and figuring out, how do I what if I stub my toe, if I drop my music, or if I look for a dog to eat it, or
Yeah.
whatever, could I maybe not go?
Yeah.
And then I thought, no, she'll call my mother and she'll scream and yell and say Helen didn't show up for her lesson. Where is she? But I was just terrified to go, and I thought, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I was like, 11 and miserable. I'm not miserable anymore. I'm excited when it's time for my piano lesson, and the only time I'm a little bit unhappy is if I haven't practiced enough.
Mhm.
So I know that about myself. That if I'm prepared, it's much better.
Yeah.
And then, of course, dealing with my anxiety, playing in front of you or anybody else.
Wow.
So, but we're working on that.
We're still working on it.
Yes, we're working on it.
So I guess, I mean, let was it? I guess I'm curious. Like, was it ever a question in the past year when everything shut down? I mean, we continue to do lessons online. Um, was it? Did you ever think, well, this it's really just not worth doing this? Like to just kind of hang it up.
No, and not only did I not think it was not worth it, I felt that it was even more important than ever. I mean, I was almost tempted to, take more lessons, and to be able, because I worked hard and I had a little more time because I didn't have to travel.
Uh-huh.
I did everything on Zoom, and my days were, a little bit richer. I say that all the time. People say, "Well, how'd you get through the pandemic? Were you depressed? No, I was not. I mean, I even came up with a wonderful project that you helped me see through to the end of recording some music. And I don't know that I ever would have done it in a normal year.
Right.
So the pandemic was great. And at first I thought, oh, I can't do these lessons on my phone. Well, after the first one, I thought, I can do these lessons on my phone. This is no problem. This was really fun. I mean, and you could hear everything. I could, it didn't sound so good, the way the piano sounded, but it's like I didn't miss a beat. It was amazing.
Yeah. Pandemic, actually, I think there certainly are silver linings.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was a sort of a chance just to kind of get out of the rat race,
Right.
Just to step back and, it's funny. I very often talk to my students in the collaborative class that I teach because they ask me. We talk about repertoire and what I play, and they, I think maybe it's slightly jaded, but I tell them that, I would say a good 50% of the music that I have to perform, I'm not crazy about, because I think when you're that age and you're in school, like the pieces that you play, you become just absolutely enamored with, right? You love every piece that you play. And that's kind of why you get into the business, right? Is because you have these pieces that you just absolutely love. But then when it becomes a job, then they don't understand that, yes, you actually have to learn how to play music that you don't particularly care for, but you can't let anyone know that you don't care for it. But I've been doing that for so long that I felt like I had lost touch with the music that I do really, really love. And so now,
give me an example of something that you don't love that I might know that you play. I mean, that's really interesting. I never thought about that.
I don't know. I mean, I play a lot of. Okay, so you know that I play a lot of contemporary music.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing about contemporary music is that it's contemporary music, and we haven't had the luxury of time to kind of weed out the stuff that's not so good.
Right.
And so sometimes you come across some pieces that just, they're not as good as some other ones. But you still have to give that performance, and you still have to sell the piece because, I always sort of rely on this idea that obviously this piece is very meaningful to the person who wrote it.
Right.
And so I have to kind of dig deep within myself to find that.
Mhm.
to have that same kind of inspiration. Um, but sometimes it's like it's the fake it till you make it kind of thing, right?
Fake it till you make it.
Um, whereas, yeah, like during the pandemic, it was like it took me actually a few weeks to kind of be able to pivot and say, now I have the luxury of I don't have any concerts coming up, but I still want to play to kind of just keep my chops up. Um, so what do I play? Like now I have a choice, of all these things. What is it that I want to revisit or to sort of go to? And it's really great to sort of have the time to explore that again and to sort of become in touch with that side again. And also to see like how I've actually changed, my taste have changed since I was in college, more able to choose the repertoire that I play. So,
What was one of the things that you went back to?
oh, Bach,
Okay,
for sure,
good.
Bach. Yeah, just can't get that. It's just,
I had this is a little bit different, but it's sort of like revisiting music. Um, as you know, I just started a new Bach,
yes,
and it's very challenging for me. It's hard. It's hard work, even though
yeah,
it's beautiful. And I found myself like 2/3 of the way through my practice time when I was away for the weekend. I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I thought, what am I going to do? Like, I can't keep working on this. It's just too, I have to play something that makes me feel good. So what did I do? I got out my little Scriabins and I played all four of them, and it was still very, very with me because
right.
they weren't old and I had to struggle to get through them, and it was so wonderful. I felt so good, and then I was revved up and I went right back to Bach and I said, I can do this. I can do this. Just put the numbers on the notes. You don't have to. You can put the numbers on the. You can do your fingering so that you don't have to forget it. And I was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
but that break was going back to something that felt good
Hmm.
was unbelievable. So. Uh, I think about that a lot. In a way, through another third party, Kuang-Hao chose me. He just didn't know it. When my piano teacher died, who was a mutual friend of both of ours, I was bereft for many reasons. I adored this woman. But to have it happen at a point when I was really doing so well with my music, I just felt abandoned. It was
Mhm.
awful. So that was the selfish part of losing a friend and a good teacher. So what do? I finally, when I had the courage to do it, I started talking to my friend, the cellist who plays with the Chicago Symphony, who's also a friend of Kuang-Hao's.
Yes.
And I said, Brant, what am I going to do? I want to keep, playing music. I don't know who to go to. I don't know where to start. I don't want to go to DePaul. I don't want to, I just want a teacher to fall out of the air. That's going to be wonderful. And he looked at me and he said, well, why don't you ask Kuang-Hao if he'll teach you? And I looked at him in shock. I said, Kuang-Hao teaches at Roosevelt and Northwestern, and he doesn't teach old ladies. So this is ridiculous. I'm not going to, he'll be insulted if I ask him to teach me. He said, I don't think he will. Why don't you just write him an email and give him a chance, see what he says. And so it took me a little while. And then finally I did it. I was so afraid of being turned down that it just took me a while. And then eventually I did. And Kuang-Hao very graciously said, well, of course, I'd be delighted to teach you. So, it was, as my grandmother said, it was beschert. Meant to be.
No, I have absolutely no regrets. No, it's been wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, because you bring something to the lessons that my other students don't. So it's great. Like I said, you have a perspective from music that I think they're not there yet.
Because they're young.
They're young.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
young. A lot of living, makes your perspective change.
Right.
So, and we also share a lot of things in common. We have a lot of common friends.
That's
and
true.
Knowledge of the city, and organizations that make music in the city, and it's all part of the. I don't know. I guess I would never have been happy having another teacher who was just a technician, who would come in and out of my life every week and just focus on just the
Mm.
notes. Debbie was like that too. She was a very rich,
Yeah,
broad
for
human
sure,
being,
for
very
sure.
much a part of the city, and so are you. And that's important to me. You mean something. I mean, I care about your kids, your wife. I want to share music with them.
Right.
So I guess that's part of what you know makes my music so important to me. I mean, it's more than just the piano. It's it's life. It's life.
Well, that seems like a good place to stop, right?
Yeah. I can't believe how fast this went.
I'm not surprised. Come on. It's the two of us chatting. Thank you so much for doing